Hello, my name is Sophia, and the day my entire world turned upside down was my 27th birthday. It sounds almost banal, like a script for a melodrama on a nightly TV channel. But no, life rarely bothers to invent original plots. Let me rewind a little to explain how things reached this point. For 3 years, I worked as a graphic designer at a small agency in San Francisco. The job wasn't glamorous or high-paying, but I enjoyed creating things that made someone's day a little brighter. Logos, banners, packaging that later flashed in shop windows or on phone screens. In a world where everything quickly becomes obsolete, my creations lived on, if only for a day or an hour. I was proud of that. I lived in a modest but cozy apartment with a roommate named Beatrice. We rented it on the 3rd floor of an old brick building where the windows creaked in the wind and the staircase smelled of dust and coffee. Our building had no peeling paint, strange smells, or cockroaches. Not luxurious, but not a nightmare either. We often joked that it was held together by a promise and the tips the tenants left to the universe for its patience. My family, on the other hand, lived differently. Grandpa Robert, a man who always had money and an uncanny sense for the future. Back in the 80s, he invested in computer companies when everyone considered them toys for eccentrics. Now, we're talking millions. He lived in another state, and I saw him rarely, a couple of times a year, short calls, occasional messages. But he always asked, "Are you still drawing?" And I answered yes, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. My parents, Marco and Victoria, lived in Marin County, a place where even the air seemed filtered from poverty. Their house was huge, 4 bedrooms, a pool, a 3-car garage. They drove a white Lexus and a silver Porsche, vacationed in Europe twice a year, and collected designer handbags as if they were certificates of existence. When I visited them, I felt like a tourist in a museum of success, where achievements were displayed behind glass cases. But entry was forbidden, and I was paying off my student loan, $70,000. That number pulsed somewhere under my skin, a constant reminder of the price of a dream. When I graduated from art school, my parents came to the ceremony, radiant as always. I expected that maybe they would help, a little, at least as a sign of support. But inside a beautifully wrapped box was a book on financial literacy. My father, patting me on the shoulder, uttered a phrase that made me want to either laugh or cry. "It's time to find your own path in life, kiddo." I never asked Grandpa for money. Pride, probably, got in the way. I wanted to prove I could make it on my own, even if it meant eating ramen 5 nights in a row and hunting for discounts in secondhand stores. And then, a week before my birthday, everything went to hell. On Tuesday afternoon, my boss called me into his office. He had a guilty look, like someone about to step on another's dream. "Sophia, I'm sorry, but we have to let you go. Downsizing." That was it. 5 minutes, and I was packing my things into a cardboard box, like in a bad TV series, only without the cameras rolling or music playing. I had savings for 2 months. Rent was due. The loan payment loomed like a shadow on the wall. That evening, I called my parents. I tried not to cry. "Mom, I lost my job," I said. "What a pity, dear," she replied distractedly, and I heard the clicking of laptop keys. "But you'll manage. You always do." "It's hard. I don't know how I'll pay the rent," I said quietly. "Maybe you should have saved more," she cut in. "By the way, I booked a table at Atelier Grinned for Saturday. We'll celebrate your birthday." I almost laughed. Atelier Grinned, a place where dinner cost nearly $300 per person. "Mom, I can't afford that," I said. "Maybe just at home?" "Nonsense," she replied. "You can't skimp on celebrations, and don't you dare bother your grandfather with your problems. He's not well." I just said okay and hung up. There was no point in shouting. That evening, I sat on our old sofa with Beatrice. She was that rare type of person who knows how to listen without pitying or lecturing. After hearing everything about the job, money, parents, she sighed and handed me a can of beer. "Your parents are something else," she said. "Don't worry about the rent. I'll cover it until you get back on your feet." I hugged her so tightly I felt something crack in her rib. Maybe friendship is the real miracle, quiet and simple. My birthday crept up unnoticed. I took out my only decent dress, black, slightly faded, bought 3 years ago at Nordstrom Rack. I did my own hair and makeup as best I could. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought, 27. The age when you're supposed to know where you're going, yet you're still standing in the same place, between almost and not yet. I took the bus to the restaurant, clutching an old clutch with lipstick, a transit pass, and a piece of anxiety inside. That day, I didn't yet know that everything was just beginning. When I arrived, my parents were already there, seated at a corner table. Mom wore a massive diamond necklace that probably cost more than my annual salary. Dad had on a Rolex. "Happy birthday, darling," she whispered, kissing my cheek. "You look tired." "Thanks, Mom." We ordered drinks, and the conversation became agonizing. They talked about the Amalfi Coast, the new Tesla Model S, a sale at the country club where Dad had just paid for Mom's tennis lessons. Not a word about my job. I tried to smile, listened to their monologue about comfort as a natural state, and felt something cold and heavy tightening under my heart, like an invisible knot pulled to its limit. Grandpa Robert and his assistant Michelle entered the restaurant. Even at 80, he seemed like a man before whom time had bowed its head. Tall, silver-haired, in a perfectly tailored suit, his gait as precise as a conductor of an ancient orchestra. When he approached our table, the voices around us fell silent almost automatically, and Mom, as if guarding a display case, tightly gripped her necklace. Dad tensed, a flicker of anxiety hastily crossing his face. "There's my favorite grandchild," he said with a lightly self-satisfied smile, Robert Boom, coming over to give me a real hug, not that Aries nonsense. I smiled politely and felt something inside tremble from a childhood memory. His voice was the same as in those rare calls when he'd suddenly send me postcards. Grandpa sat down, and his piercing blue eyes lingered on me longer than usual. "So, Sophia, how are things?" he asked. I glanced at Mom, who shot me a murderous look full of misunderstanding and hidden barbs. "Oh, fine. Just working hard," I replied, feeling the words weaken in my throat. "Good," he nodded, and then, as if changing tone, asked, "And are you reviewing the quarterly reports for your investment portfolio?" I blinked and felt the air grow thicker. "What trust fund?" I asked, and a silence fell over the room, so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Grandpa's expression changed. His voice became soft and arrogantly calm at the same time. "The trust fund I set up when you were born. $1 million was deposited then, and at 25 it was supposed to transfer to your control." I opened my mouth but couldn't utter a word, as if my tongue belonged to someone else. Mom clenched her necklace. Dad cleared his throat, his fingers nervously tapping the table. "The granddaughter doesn't know about her trust fund?" one of them said, as if it were a simple misunderstanding. The words hung in the air, then Grandpa quietly added, "And what about the apartment in Pacific Heights, the one I bought for Sophia for her 25th? I gave you the keys to handle." "Apartment?" I whispered. Mother turned pale. Father looked like he was about to faint. Grandpa took out his phone and told his assistant to connect him with Michael Anderson. The politely flustered restaurant manager offered a private room, and we were escorted, adorned with light and expectation, to a small salon. 20 minutes later, a man in an expensive suit rushed in, holding a briefcase. "Michael Anderson, your grandfather's attorney," he introduced himself, shaking hands as if sealing the legal flesh of fate with a stamp. He opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents that smelled of office severity and lengthy explanations. My parents froze. Mom still twisted the diamond necklace on her finger, as if hoping the jewel would teach time to move slower. The lawyer began reading calmly. "Your trust fund was established with an initial capital of $1 million at your birth. Considering investment growth over 27 years, its value should be approximately $3.4 million. I felt the ground cut away beneath my feet. "Can you check the current balance?" Grandpa asked in a tone that, at that moment, seemed even more terrifying. Michael worked on his tablet and his face darkened. "The current balance is approximately $200,000, he said quietly, but each word landed like a blow. The room seemed to explode, the air filled with distorted questions. I jumped up so abruptly my chair fell. "Where's the rest?" I choked out, and the lawyer carefully produced additional papers. He began reading out the transactions, and each item flowed into me like a cold ribbon. Systematic withdrawals over the past 7 years, large transfers, a $450,000 mortgage payoff, car purchases totaling $280,000, specifically 2 Tesla Model S sedans, a $320,000 home renovation. With each named amount, my breath grew shorter. I heard my notions of justice disappearing. He continued. A $500,000 investment in Victoria Thompson's real estate venture, deemed a total loss, numerous vacation expenses, trips across Europe, Caribbean cruises, first-class flights, and finally the purchase of a property in Malibu for $1.8 million. Mom started crying, not from pain or remorse, but with those artificial tears she turned on as needed, like an actress on stage, confident in the power of her repertoire. I watched her face contort, but behind the grimace, there wasn't a drop of genuine feeling. It was the same expression she used when negotiating with a stylist or a diamond dealer. "Marco, please," she whispered, clutching his sleeve as if it were the last argument in their shared performance. He finally spoke, dryly in a stranger's voice. "We can explain. We were just trying." He fell silent. "Trying what?" Grandpa Robert's voice cut through the air, cold and hard as steel. "Steal from your own daughter while she ate cheap noodles and killed herself at work?" His words sounded like a verdict. Mom shook her head, her sobs growing louder. "It's not theft," she wailed. "We were managing. We were her." "Parents?" I interrupted. My voice cracked, but I finally found the strength to speak. "You gave me a book on financial literacy for graduation," I said, looking at my father. "While you were spending my millions, I was paying off $70,000 in student loans. Do you know how many evenings I went without dinner because I had to choose between food and debt payments?" He looked away and, avoiding my eyes, muttered, "You needed to learn responsibility." Responsibility? I almost laughed, bitterly, soundlessly. "Responsibility?" I repeated, feeling a tremor of anger rise through my body. "Are you joking?" Robert raised his hand and the room fell silent. His voice became quiet, but each phrase cut like a knife. "Now, about the apartment. The house in Pacific Heights I bought for Sophia's 25th birthday. I gave you both keys 2 years ago to pass on to her. Where is that apartment?" A long silence followed. Mom clenched her purse until her knuckles turned white. Dad stared at his hands. "We rented it out," he finally squeezed out. "I'm sorry." Robert's voice became dangerously quiet, almost a whisper. "The rental income you needed?" he repeated. Mom spoke hurriedly, stumbling over every word. "It was just sitting empty, and we thought—" But her voice drowned under the sound of typing. Michael was already rapidly typing on his laptop. "Here," he said, "I'm pulling up the property records. A 3-bedroom apartment purchased 2 years ago for $1.2 million fully paid off. The current market rental rate is approximately $4,500 per month." I jerked my head up. "So you collected over $100,000 in rent for my apartment?" My voice trembled, but I couldn't stop. And all this time, I was living with roommates, cockroaches, and ramen. Robert slowly stood up. His movements were restrained, but they held the power of a man accustomed to authority. "Give me the keys," he said. Mom's hands shook as she opened her purse. She pulled out a small set, 2 keys and a heart-shaped keychain. For a moment, she held them in her hands, as if hoping she could take it back. But meeting my father's gaze, she finally extended her hand. Robert took the keys and placed them in front of me. "These are your daughter's keys," he said coldly. "They're only 2 years late." I took them. The metal was still warm from Mom's palms. The keys to my apartment. Mine. Robert turned to Michelle. Conduct a full forensic audit of all accounts, transactions, and assets that Marco and Victoria have had access to over the past 7 years. Everything. Michelle nodded, already typing on her phone. Yes, Mr. Thompson. Mom shrieked, You can't do this to us, we're family. Robert looked at her for a long moment. Family doesn't steal from family. Both of you, leave. My lawyers will be in touch. They stood up. Dad seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His shoulders slumped. His step became unsteady. Mom tried to keep up the act, crying, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, but even her hypocrisy had weakened. Sophia, my father said quietly, please, darling, don't. I replied, just don't. They left, and the sound of Mom's heels echoed on the floor like a remnant of a past where their confidence still lived. But now it was limping. When the door closed behind them, I couldn't hold back any longer. I started shaking. Everything I'd held inside for years, the resentment, humiliation, loneliness, burst out. Robert came around the table and hugged me. It was a real hug, not formal, not polite, not obligatory. Warm, simple, genuine. I buried my face in his jacket and for the first time in a long while allowed myself to cry without shame. I'm so sorry, dear, he said quietly. I should have kept an eye on this. I should have known. How could they do this to me? I whispered. I don't know, he replied, but we'll fix what we can. He pulled back, looked me straight in the eyes. Sophia, you need to decide. Do you want to press charges? This is grand larceny. They could go to prison. I looked at the keys in my hand, small but heavy. They held everything. The years of struggle, humiliation, sleepless nights. I need time to think, Grandpa. Is that okay? Of course. Take all the time you need. He sighed, but before I could exhale any semblance of calm, he added, Sophia, they're planning something. Michelle just found plane tickets to Costa Rica in their names, purchased 3 days ago. The words hit me like ice water. They were going to run, I whispered. We sat in silence. It felt like even the walls were listening. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. They had come to my birthday dinner knowing they were planning to flee the country with the remnants of my money. I need to go home, I said, feeling fatigue wash over me in a wave, heavy and viscous, as if the night itself was trying to wrap me in numbness. I need to think. Robert nodded. Michelle will drive you, he said calmly. And Sophia, remember, that apartment is yours. You can move in whenever you're ready. His voice was firm, like a vow. I thanked him, and clutching the keys, stepped out into the cool darkness of the street. The world around me felt alien, surreal, as if I were walking through a movie where I didn't yet know my script. I got home closer to midnight. In the dim lamplight, Beatrice was sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, an open bottle of wine, and 2 glasses beside her. She looked up when she saw me. Tell me everything, she demanded, pushing a glass toward me. I sat down next to her and began, first quietly, haltingly, then faster and faster, about the trust fund, the stolen millions, the apartment in Pacific Heights, and their tickets to Costa Rica. She listened without interrupting, her eyes wide. When I finished, a thick silence hung in the room. Holy shit, S, she finally exhaled. It's like watching one of those crime series, only it's your life. Your parents are actual criminals. I let out a bitter laugh. I know, I still can't believe it. Wait, she squinted. You have an apartment now, a real one, in Pacific Heights. I held up the keys and the metal jingled softly. 2 years, I said. They rented it out for 2 years while I lived here with cockroaches. Beatrice shook her head. That's just insane. We finished the wine in silence, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to smile. The next morning, the phone rang. Michelle's voice was even, businesslike, but with an undercurrent of concealed urgency. Sophia, I need to brief you on the audit findings. We've uncovered a lot. We met at a downtown coffee shop, bright, noisy, smelling of fresh pastries. Michelle brought a laptop and a thick stack of folders. "Your parents were very systematic," she said, scrolling through spreadsheets. "They started small, 20,000 here, 30 there, but then the scale grew." I looked at the rows of numbers and my vision blurred. The Malibu house, loan payoffs, bills, transfers. My entire childhood, my whole life was now reduced to lines on a screen. "The largest purchase was the house in Malibu," she continued. "But the daily expenses are staggering. Last month, your mother spent $8,000 on a handbag. Your father bought a boat 6 months ago." I stayed silent. "We are seizing everything acquired with the fund's assets," Michelle added. "The court has already issued an order to freeze all their accounts. They can't access anything right now." She spoke calmly, as if reading a weather report, but each word hit me like cold rain. "We are documenting everything," she added. "Then we'll begin liquidations and attempt to recover the funds." Robert acted with astonishing speed. Within 3 days, the Malibu house was listed for sale. Next came the mansion in Marin, the cars, both Teslas, and finally, the boat, which turned out to be a 40-foot yacht, gleaming as if made from vanity itself. My phone didn't stop ringing. Mom, Dad, unknown numbers. I didn't answer. Beatrice became my wall. "Do you want to see your apartment?" she asked one evening, looking at me over her laptop. "The real one?" We drove there in her beat-up Honda with windows that wouldn't open. The trip took less than half an hour, but it felt like an eternity. The building was modern, with clean lines and a glass facade. A doorman, a tall man with graying temples, stood at the entrance. "Good evening, Miss Thompson," he said with a slight smile. "Mr. Robert called, said you'd be coming." His politeness sent a shiver through me. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, high ceilings, huge windows with a view of the bay, reflecting the last rays of the sunset. The air smelled fresh, of expensive wood and something new, as if life itself was about to start anew. It was fully furnished, tastefully understated. In the desk drawer, I found copies of the lease agreements. My parents had been charging $4,500 a month, $54,000 a year, and I was counting coins to pay the utilities. That evening, Robert called. "Sophia," he said, "we've recovered about $2 million already. The house is selling quickly. We're liquidating the rest." I was silent. "How are they?" I finally asked. "They had to move out of the house yesterday. Right now, I believe they're living in a motel." I felt a pang, not of pity, no. Something else, strange and heavy. Maybe the memory of how I once loved them. The following week passed as if in a dream. I started packing. Beatrice helped, joked, hummed under her breath, but her eyes were sad. "You know," she said, wrapping my mug in newspaper, "I'm going to miss you as a roommate. You were the best." I smiled. "Beatrice," I replied, "I owe you. You offered to pay my rent when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to help you." I called Robert. "You have connections, Grandpa. Help Beatrice. She deserves better." He didn't hesitate. "Of course." Within a week, Beatrice had 3 interviews at leading city banks. When she called me with the news, her voice trembled with happiness. "I got a job at Wells Fargo. The salary is twice what I made before." I laughed through tears. "This is insane, Beatrice." She replied, "No, it's justice. Now I can afford a proper apartment, maybe even one without cockroaches." Meanwhile, the investigation continued. New details emerged, as if someone was slowly cleaning a dusty display case, and behind each glass pane lay another piece of evidence. My parents had lived exclusively on the funds intended for me from the trust for years. It wasn't a sudden weakness or a lapse in judgment. It looked like a consistent, calculated system. My father, who for 3 years had pretended to go to work every day, was actually unemployed. He woke up early, put on a suit, left the house, and returned only for dinner to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Mom's real estate business had long since collapsed, and instead of declaring bankruptcy, they seemed to have decided to plug the holes with my money. Their social circle, where they had once shone, distanced itself on its own. Country club friends who had studied my name in the context of the Thompson family vanished, not out of shame, but because it was advantageous to stay away from those involved in a public scandal. Robert, whom I had previously seen as a distant figure in pictures on my phone, suddenly acted with lightning speed and ruthlessness. He assembled a team of lawyers and financial experts, and I had to stop being an observer and become a participant in the legal proceedings of my own life. He took me to offices where they spoke a language I was now learning to understand: trusts, liquid assets, account freezes, restitution. I listened as if translating a lecture from a foreign language, and gradually the words became clearer. It became evident which sums went to minor whims and which to expensive purchases: new $1,000 handbags, first-class flights, dinners I was never allowed to join, as if to preserve the facade. The most shocking line in the reports: the purchase of the Malibu house as the final chord of madness stood out brightly against the backdrop of daily expenses and reimbursements. Grandpa wasn't just demanding justice. He was investing in its restoration. His people quickly froze accounts, seized cars and property, and the Malibu house and the Marine mansion went into the sales process. It seemed mechanical and terrifying at the same time. Things I had considered part of someone else's life since childhood were suddenly turning into assets that could be recovered and distributed according to the law. I felt no particular joy from these sales, rather relief and fatigue, like after a long run when your heart is still pounding, but you've already crossed the finish line. Parallel to the legal battles, I was learning to live again. Robert insisted I take a financial literacy course, introduced me to advisors, sat me down at negotiation tables where I was learning, for the first time, to stand up for the value of my work and look numbers in the eye without fear. My professional life transformed. I opened a small consulting studio for graphic design, and if my days were once filled with freelance gigs and underpayment, now startups with real budgets began approaching me. The first significant project was a mobile app interface redesign, work that brought not only money but also pride. I learned to value my labor and set boundaries. This feeling of control was almost alien, but all the more precious because of it. Beatrice became the mainstay of my new days. She, whose humor and kindness had once saved me from despair, was now experiencing her own professional leap. Grandpa helped with contacts, and within weeks of interviews, she was hired by a major bank. She laughed and cried simultaneously, saying she could now afford more space, and I was genuinely happy for her success, as for a sister. We were both changing, but not losing each other. Our closeness became another kind of wealth, one that couldn't be measured in statements. My parents, for their part, entered therapy and began complying with court-ordered repayments. They found jobs, modest without the glittering backdrop, and the city now saw them in a different role. My father in an insurance company office, my mother behind a reception desk. It was humiliating, and in that there was justice. They paid compensation, slowly returning what they could, even if the sums were tiny compared to what they had taken. Time passed, and the world grew steadier. My business gained momentum. I held meetings in Soma, sitting in a bright office with a city view, meeting clients and discussing design strategies. Grandpa continued to visit every week, sitting across from me and sharing not just money but wisdom, why it was important to protect oneself legally and emotionally. His minor heart attack reminded us both that time passes faster than it seems. And yet, 2 years after that fateful dinner, my mother came to my office. She wasn't the gleaming image I knew. Her roots were gray, her face tired, her clothes simple and modest. When she sat in the chair, she looked as if she feared not my anger, but my indifference. Her voice trembled as she began talking about therapy, lessons learned, how they were trying to correct their way of life. I listened and felt the past and present colliding in my chest. She looked at me and uttered words that seemed to shatter the glass of my calm life. It sounded like both an admission and an accusation, an attempt to shift blame. Her voice mixed regret and complaint, and in that moment I understood that behind all her justification lay a simple, inescapable truth. You stole from your own daughter." "I know," she said. "At first we convinced ourselves it was just a temporary measure, that we were taking a little to fix up the house, buy paint, replace a leaky faucet just to keep what we'd built over the years from falling apart. Then came the car. The old one broke down completely, and we decided a new one wasn't a luxury but a necessity. But then it became like an addiction, something we couldn't stop. It was like a drug. Each new expense brought brief relief, then demanded more and more and more. Every time we took money, we had to take more to maintain the illusion of our former standard of living, as if we could keep playing that role without consequences. "You saw how I struggled," she said quietly. "I tried to stop it, but I couldn't anymore." I sat silently, listening to her choose her words, careful not to spill their meaning. "The therapist," she said, explained that they had been in a state of complete denial all that time, that when a person is blinded by shame, they start convincing themselves they're acting for something noble, for the family, for stability, for the future, when in reality, they just can't stop spending. She pulled a thick envelope from her bag and carefully placed it in front of me. "It's not money," she said, noticing my wariness. "It's a letter from both of us. Our therapist insisted we write it all down so we couldn't hide behind words like made a mistake or didn't think. Take responsibility," he said. "Your father and I worked on it for weeks. I didn't reach for it. The letter lay between us like an unexploded shell." She continued, "I'm not asking you to forgive us. We don't deserve forgiveness. But you should know that we understand now what we did. We destroyed our relationship with you for money, for things, for a fake life that didn't even belong to us." "You were going to run to Costa Rica," I said. She nodded, and tears streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "We were so deep in our own madness we believed that if we just left and started over, we could pretend nothing happened. But your grandfather saved us from becoming complete criminals." We sat for a long time in silence, where only our breathing and the ticking of the clock could be heard. Then she added, "Your father is getting better. The routine, the consistency of a regular job actually helps him. And I'm learning to live simply. We have a small apartment. We take the bus. We cook at home. It's strange, but it's like I'm learning to be a person again." "Are you asking for something?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "No," she said. "I just hope that one day we might be able to re-enter your life, even a little bit. We're getting help. We're paying back what we can. We're trying to be better." I looked at her, at the woman who once held me in her arms, told me bedtime stories, then betrayed me, as if cutting an invisible umbilical cord between us to feel richer. "I'm not ready," I said. "I might never be ready." She nodded, accepting it calmly like a verdict. "I understand. Just keep going to therapy. Keep up the payments. Keep working on yourselves. Maybe someday." I didn't finish because I didn't believe the words myself. She stood up, wiped her face, and said, "That's more than we deserve. Thank you for agreeing to see me." When the door closed behind her, I remained seated, looking at the envelope. It lay on the desk like a heart removed from another body. I didn't open it right away, waiting maybe half an hour. Inside were 12 pages of handwritten text, their handwriting intermingled like voices in a dialogue, each line a confession, an inventory, a testament. Everything they had taken, all the bills, all the lies, every attempt to justify, every "forgive me." I read to the end of the first page and realized I couldn't go on. I folded it all back up and put it in the bottom desk drawer. Maybe someday I'll return to that letter, or maybe never. That evening I had dinner with Grandpa. We ate at our usual Italian restaurant on the corner, and when I told him about Mom's visit, he was silent for a long time, looking past me. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. He sighed. "That's your decision, Sophia. They're paying the price. It's up to you whether to let them back in. I haven't forgiven them. They robbed my granddaughter, betrayed the most sacred trust. But you know, I'm old. I've learned that holding on to anger is like holding hot coals. At first, you think you're ready to throw them at someone else, but in the end, you only burn yourself. Beatrice, when I told her, was much more direct. They're toxic, S, but they're your parents. If one day you decide to try and reconnect, I'm here. If not, I'm here too. And that here turned out to be the most valuable promise in my life. Months passed. My business grew. I hired 3 more employees, rented a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time in my life, I could say I had achieved it all on my own. I continued learning from Grandpa. He still went over investment portfolios with me, taught me caution and patience. The trust fund where it all began now existed in a new form. Every cent recovered was invested correctly, transparently, meaningfully. I knew where my money was going, and I knew these were my decisions. My parents continued paying compensation and attending therapy. On my 29th birthday, a card arrived from my father, just a signature, Dad. No words, no explanations. I didn't reply, but I didn't throw it away. A month later, a Christmas card came from Mom, cheap with a drawn fir tree and a neat inscription, "Thinking of you, love. Mom." Small steps. Maybe, maybe not. I still didn't know if I was ready to forgive, but looking at the bay lights from my window, I realized I am happy. I had my apartment, my business, my family, the one I had chosen and earned, Grandpa and Beatrice. I had a life I built with my own hands, even when the world was crumbling around me. And perhaps that was better than any trust fund, because this life belonged to me. By right, by labor, by heart. And nothing, not even the theft and lies of my parents, could take that away from me anymore.